Welcome back for another book review. We are doing so many videos in the orange light. I'm gonna have to figure out something long term, but for right now, this is my time to record, and it is dark outside, which means we have to rely on lamps, and lamps are orange, apparently. So, sorry for the weird, awkward lighting, but we're talking about this one today. So this is Pagan Curious, A Beginner's Guide to Nature, Magic, and Spirituality, a foreword by Sova Ravenwolf. This is written by Debra DeAngelo? I don't know if that's how you're supposed to pronounce it, but this one. So this book covers a variety of topics, and it's sectioned out into 3 different points. You have your inner realm, your outer realm, and the magical realm. Within each of those, there's a variety of different topics that are discussed, and a lot of this does kind of have a bit of a heavy bias from the author. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 star because mainly, while this book technically does talk about pagan topics, it actually didn't feel like the forefront of this book. It isn't really a great book if you have somebody who is pagan curious. Like, the title feels kind of wasted on this book, to be perfectly honest. This is not a book that if somebody was like, oh, you're pagan, what's that about? This is like not a book that you think it would be. You would think based off that title, it would be a great book to hand people, to give them a baseline of what we believe and like what we're all about. No, it's not. And it kind of feels like the pagan side of this was like an afterthought for the majority of this book. There's just a huge emphasis on like some really random points throughout this book that just didn't really, again, it didn't fit for the book, really, for me. The only thing that was kind of interesting was that they have you do a quiz for your element, which this one lined up exactly as I anticipated it would. And when I've done the like Eastern ones, I don't match. So it's weird because in this one, I naturally fall into water easily. That's tip-top one. And when I've done it for others, it was like, I'm not water? What? So this one I was like, okay, yeah, we're back to my normal. Cool. So that was, you know, kind of interesting, but this book just had a very big bias from the author, and it just felt like she was needing to rant about a variety of topics, and this was the place to do it. For instance, there's a lot of, like, when you are reading through this book, like, in Life in Your Body chapter, and, like, going feral, like, there was a lot in those chapters that had nothing really to do with modern paganism, and very much more of, like there was so much talked about for like diets and how we talk to ourselves, mostly about diets, and the role for women to play, and like there was, you know, it's like important-ish topics, but it just didn't really fit with like what you would think this book would be about, because it had nothing to do with like nature, magic, spirituality. It was just like these random points that it's like, okay. Again, this is just not a book that is going to answer any questions for anyone who's curious, really. The third part of the book kind of goes into witchery, but even then it's like pretty surface level, and by that point you're kind of like checked out of the book. A lot of people are not going to get to the end of books, especially if you are, you know, just mildly curious about what somebody's doing and you're like, oh, my coworker said they were pagan, now there's a book on Pagan Curious. I am Pagan Curious, and they grabbed this book. They're not necessarily going to get to the end, and the first chunk of this book is like nothing really related to paganism. Again, it's kind of there, but it really felt like an afterthought and just really wasn't at the forefront in comparison to like most of the other books that are aimed at beginners and just people who are curious. And that kind of sucks, because it's like the title would be fantastic, you'd think, but it just didn't quite do what I wanted it to. The author had some, again, serious bias throughout here of, you could tell exactly what the author believed, and it was just one of those where there's a lot of topics that they have very strong opinions about that didn't really feel like it belonged in a book on what is pagan, you know? It could have been even like a more in-depth later discussion for like intermediate to advanced pagans, but with it being aimed at beginners and people who are curious, it didn't really seem to fit. So I would recommend this book to anyone who is wanting a little bit more of kind of almost like a memoir style of writing, and just some random little like early pagan bits of like, how do we set up an altar and things like that. But they're very brief, and like a little bit of like, what are the elements? But for the most part, it does read a bit like a memoir, Again, got a lot of heavy bias from the author that isn't my favorite thing. So needless to say, I am not buying this book. I am happy to return it to the library soon. So anyways, I would love to know your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons. If you want to support me and get access to exclusive content, it is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I post every single day. And until next time, thank you so much for watching, and blessed be.